President Obama in Louisiana. Why his trip to survey flood damage continues to draw criticism. Meet Jill Stein. Where does the Green Party presidential candidate stand on issues important to Catholics? Killed again? Some doubt Nigeria's repeated claims that elusive Boko Haram leader has died in an airstrike. And useless TV ratings. Is TV violence confusing to your kids, regardless of the rating system? Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, August 23rd, 2016. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. His critics say it's too little, too late. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn covers President Obama's quick trip today to flood-ravaged Louisiana.
Brian, the president visited the area hardest hit by the storm, comforting some of the tens of thousands who lost their homes. He conveyed the nation's prayers, saying, "We are heartbroken for them." The president arrived 10 days after the storm. He came to comfort.
This is not just about property damage. This is about people's roots. Even after the TV cameras leave, the whole country is going to continue to support you and help you.
And to see this, 60,000 homes damaged, thousands living in shelters with more flooding expected through the weekend.
It begins with outstanding leadership from the top.
The Obama administration says the federal government response was swift and effective. The FEMA administrator arrived a week ago. $127 million in aid has been handed out.
This is how I started my career.
Yet his critics say the president's visit came too late. He says it's not important.
This is not a one-off. This is not a photo op issue. This is how do you make sure that a month from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, people still are getting the help that they need.
The president is also meeting with the family members of 3 slain police officers killed in an ambush last month in Baton Rouge, and with the family of Alton Sterling, a black man shot several times while being held to the ground by police. Brian.
Thank you, Lauren Ashburn at the White House. Still unreleased documents in the Hillary Clinton email investigation could be made public earlier than expected. A federal judge wants the State Department to have a plan for releasing the emails by September 22nd. The department had proposed releasing them in mid-October, just weeks before the presidential election. Republicans point to already released messages, saying they show foreign donors got preferential treatment from the State Department after donating to the Clinton Foundation.
The amounts involved, the favors done, and the significant number of times it was done require an expedited investigation by a special prosecutor immediately.
And the Green Party presidential nominee weighs in on this controversy. Jason Calvi questioned Dr. Jill Stein about it today.
What are your thoughts on the latest batch of Hillary Clinton emails in the State Department?
It's not a coincidence that, that Hillary has the numbers that she has as one of the most untrusted presidential candidates ever. This is the really disturbing thing. Where did her personal family financial business end, and where did the official business of the state begin? Regardless of the legality, this just raises serious questions about judgment and character that, in my view, are just not compatible with someone that you want to trust as the leader of the country.
Dr. Jill Stein slams both major political parties. She says people are hungry for more options.
We're the only such campaign that is not compromised by the power of big money, the big banks, the fossil fuel giants, the war profiteers.
Stein calls for a $15 minimum wage, free schooling through college, legalizing marijuana, and cutting military spending by 50%. She's promising a Green New Deal to fix what she calls the economic and environmental crisis.
We call for essentially declaring a climate state of emergency.
Stein also supports abortion, even allowing federal funding of it, something many Catholics and pro-lifers find objectionable. She was also the Green Party's nominee in 2012, but received less than 1% of the national vote. That may be the reason the Secret Service protects the 2 major party nominees, but not her.
We could potentially win this race. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not ruling it out.
In a four-way race between Trump, Clinton, the Libertarian Gary Johnson, and Stein, Stein's only receiving just over 3%. That's according to the Real Clear Politics average of polls. But in order for you to see her in the debates, she needs 15%. Brian?
Thanks, Jason. It's important to reiterate that Stein supports abortion. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The Nigerian Air Force says it's killed 300 Boko Haram militants, possibly its leader. The claim follows what the military calls a spectacular air raid on the terrorist group's hideout. Wyatt Goolsby reports tonight.
Brian, there's no way to confirm the claim that Boko Haram's leader has been either wounded or killed. The Nigerian military said at least 3 times in the past that they've either killed or badly injured Abubakar Shekau, only then to have him resurface. This is supposedly the man who leads Boko Haram, based in Africa, but it's hard to know for sure. Nigeria claims the terrorist group uses look-alike fighters to impersonate its leader. Late Monday night, the Nigerian military tweeted they had fatally wounded him in Friday's air raid, but they didn't say how the military got that information. The announcement comes as Secretary of State John Kerry visits Nigeria's capital, applauding the government's efforts in fighting terrorism.
And I want you to know today that the United States is deeply committed to this effort, including by helping our partners to be able to build counterterrorism capacity.
Kerry did not mention Boko Haram's leader or the air raid. Nigeria says since 2009, the group has killed 20,000 people and driven more than 2.2 million people from their homes. Boko Haram is also accused of abducting several hundred schoolgirls. Demonstrators in the capital want the government to do more to get them back.
I say to President Muhammadu Buhari, he should sit up and begin to act as the father of the nation. He should sit up and begin to act as the president.
The protest comes a week after the extremist group released a video that featured some of the kidnapped girls.
My beloved one.
This mother of one of the girls is begging the government to take action to save her daughter. She's been away from home now for more than 2 years. Nigeria's president is under increasing pressure to either rescue or negotiate for the girls, but he's wary since they've been duped before. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt. The United States mourns the loss of another American killed in Afghanistan. This soldier died in a roadside bombing while patrolling in the southern Helmand province. Another American and 6 Afghan soldiers were wounded in that attack. Iraqi forces pushed toward the town of Al-Qayyara near Mosul. They're trying to regain control from ISIS militants and foreign fighters recruited by the Islamic State group. U.S. and coalition planes supporting Iraqi troops are encountering a giant smoke screen created by burning crude oil. A suspected arson fire kills an infant, 2 little girls, and a man on Chicago's South Side early this morning. About 200 firefighters battled the apartment building fire. Witnesses say they saw people jumping from windows to escape. Chicago police believe someone set fire to a rear porch and they're searching for a person of interest. A 3-month-old was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. 2 young girls, ages 4 and 6, and a man were found dead later on the 3rd floor of the building. The Thomas More Society files a federal lawsuit against the city of Chicago over its abortion clinic bubble zone ordinance. The society's website says the law is being challenged by the ProLife Action League and sidewalk counselors. The complaint, filed today, charges the city and its leaders with unconstitutionally infringing on the rights of pro-life advocates. This law makes it illegal to approach someone walking towards an abortion clinic within a certain distance without that person's consent. And the sign goes up on Washington, D.C.'s new Planned Parenthood clinic built next door to a school. The abortion provider's website says they're close to completing what it calls a new state-of-the-art flagship health center. It was supposed to open in the spring, but the project, which has drawn pro-life protests, is apparently behind schedule. Evangeline Bartz is Corporate Counsel and Vice President of Operations for Americans United for Life. You have testified on behalf of pro-life legislation at the state level. What state legislation, very significantly, has passed recently?
Well, Brian, first of all, thank you for having me here. This has been a very positive session of state legislatures in 2016. Over 230 abortion provisions and pro-life provisions have been considered by the states. And what we have seen is there's a big interest by the state legislators to defund Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers, and also to provide increased protection for women and unborn children. So some of the laws have included bans on late-term abortion, bans on dismemberment abortions, humane treatment for deceased infants who may die from an abortion. And these are really partly in response to the videos that came out last summer.
But aren't the courts rather upholding some of this legislation, or holding it up, I should say?
Well, it's true, and that some of these laws are in litigation. And as a matter of fact, we could take a look at the case of Louisiana, which has passed 7 pro-life laws this spring. And the Center for Reproductive Rights has announced very, very happily that they are challenging each and every one of those. So yes, there are pro-life laws in litigation. Sometimes this litigation can take years, and so we're going to have to wait and see how things develop.
Can success at the state level be transformed or brought up to the federal level, and is that important, or is the state level really where it needs to be done?
It's important to have a lot of pro-life laws passed at the state level because, after all, those are the laws that are, in a sense, closest to the will of the people. Majority of Americans are pro-life. Their legislators reflect that sentiment. So if they have a strong record of passing pro-life legislation, federal legislators will take note of that, and they'll be supported and emboldened to take the strong stance they need to on pro-life issues.
Are there state legislatures that seem bent on opposing the pro-life cause?
Well, unfortunately, there are some states that consistently rank very low in terms of pro-life protection. Some of these are on the West Coast. And in this session, this spring, the California legislature passed or they adopted a resolution that praised Planned Parenthood for its work and affirmed Roe v. Wade, saying that it's a cornerstone for American women's freedom. And then in the case of Illinois, they're not necessarily an anti-life state. There's been a lot of good laws coming out of there, but they did amend one of their laws that protects conscience. So they've gutted that provision, and this will mean that Catholic hospitals and pregnancy crisis centers will have to refer or at least announce where there are abortions are available. So that's a negative outcome in Illinois.
From Americans United for Life, Evangeline Bartsch, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
Coming up, a look at the Pope's ambitious schedule and the impact of pornography. Kidnapping victim Elizabeth Smart joins an effort to share an important message. The Diocese of Memphis gets a new bishop. Pope Francis names Washington, D.C. Auxiliary Bishop Martin Holley, Shepherd of the Faithful of Memphis. Bishop Holley has been serving as Vicar General in D.C. as well as advocate for minority issues. He'll succeed retiring Bishop Terry Stein. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, the Vatican is quiet this week as much of Italy enjoys the last days of summer vacation, but Pope Francis is working, just not in the public eye. Ed Penton, our Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joining us from the Eternal City. Ed, remind us of the Americans appointed recently to major Vatican positions, and might we see more?
Yeah, there are 2 big positions, Brian. Bishop Kevin Farrell of Dallas has been made head of this new super dicastery for family, laity and life, which was a surprise, but certainly he shares very much the Pope's vision. And then, of course, Greg Burke, a St. Louis native, was appointed to succeed Father Federico Lombardi as head of the Vatican Press Office at the beginning of August. So these are big positions given to Americans. There was some surprise because there was a feeling that perhaps Pope Francis wanted to ease some of the Americans out of senior positions, but that clearly is not the case, and he's appointing those who very much share his vision.
So the fall months look very busy for the Holy Father. What does he have planned?
Yes, quite a few travels are expected, but first of all is of course the canonization of Mother Teresa on September the 4th, and then he goes to Azerbaijan and Georgia at the end of September. Then he travels to Sweden to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, which will be a big event. And of course there's a consistory probably before the end of the year, probably to time with the closing of the Year of Mercy, a consistory of cardinals to create more cardinals, perhaps about 10 in total.
Ed Penton with EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thanks for joining us, Ed.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
And the television rating system is inaccurate and in very little help to parents. That conclusion is detailed in a new study published in the journal Pediatrics. That study reveals violence is prevalent across shows regardless of rating. Scientists say the problem with TV violence is that it's trivialized and glamorized. Kids have a hard time differentiating it from reality. Parents are encouraged to watch TV with their children, discussing risky behaviors whenever possible. A victim of kidnapping and rape joins the effort to curb the spread of pornography. Elizabeth Smart was just 14 years old when she was abducted 14 years ago in Salt Lake City.
Looking at pornography wasn't enough for him. Having sex with his wife after looking at pornography, it wasn't enough for him. And then it led him to finally going out and kidnapping me. He just always wanted more.
That's an exclusive interview with the group Fight the New Drug, the first time Smart has spoken in depth about the role pornography played in her abduction. Clay Olson, CEO of Fight the New Drug, a nonprofit raising awareness about the harmful effects of pornography, Skyping with us from Salt Lake City. Clay, why do you consider pornography the new drug?
Well, over the last decade, we've been able to make some major progress within the research community about the effects of pornography on individuals, relationships, and society. And what we're now understanding is that pornography can affect individuals in a similar way that drugs can when it comes to the brain. And so we wanted to kind of play off of that.
Remind us about Elizabeth Smart's story and her now support for your work.
Elizabeth Smart's been a friend for a while. She's gone through a tragic story herself, and in communicating with her over the years, we've talked about the role that pornography has played in her abduction, and we wanted to capture that on camera and actually share that with the world. And so she obliged, and it was a good opportunity.
Do you think most people have any understanding of the harm that pornography can do to our society?
No, most people don't, and that's the whole purpose of our campaign. Most people are unaware of the potential risks that they run in viewing pornography, again, to the individual, relationships, and society. And so we are on a mission to help change the conversation and raise awareness so that people can make educated decisions when it comes to their own practices. And our objective primarily focuses on youth, because that's an area that are wildly unaware of the potential risks.
With pornography so available on the internet, it is really an epidemic. Does your organization offer hope for people caught in this trap of pornography in one form or another?
Yeah, so in addition to our awareness efforts and presenting in schools and organizations around the country and world, we also have provided and created an online program for individuals struggling, and it's free for youth. So anybody that's listening to this and is that is struggling with this on their own, they can go to fortifyprogram.org to get the help that they need.
All right, Clay Olson with Fight the New Drug, joining us from Salt Lake City by Skype tonight. Clay, we appreciate the efforts that you're putting out there, and thank you so much for joining us on EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for having me.
And people living in El Alto, Bolivia now have an image of the Virgin Mary they can really identify with. The Virgin, revered at a church in that city, is dressed in indigenous traditional clothing, carrying baby Jesus on her back. Our Lady of Assumption wears a shawl, a puff skirt, and an aguayo, a multicolored cloth used to carry babies. Father Ruben Tinko says the idea is to help women of indigenous descent identify with an image of the Virgin Mary that looks much like them. Up next, legal fight. The Attorney General of Texas responds to a lawsuit about gender. And major milestone. We remember the launch of the World Wide Web 25 years ago today. Today, August 23rd, is the memorial of St. Rose of Lima. The Peruvian saint was the first person born in the Western Hemisphere to be canonized. She is the patron of Latin America and those ridiculed for piety. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. 5 states and a Catholic hospital network file a lawsuit against a new federal regulation forcing doctors to perform gender transition procedures on children. The Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, representing Franciscan Alliance, says no doctor should be forced to perform a procedure that he or she believes will harm a child. The Attorney General of Texas applauds a federal judge's ruling blocking the Obama administration's directive on transgender students using a bathroom of their choice.
I think it's great that local decisions are going to be made now, because this was the goal here was to have one edict coming down from Washington, whereas in the past we've let individual school districts, school boards, parents, let them make the decision. That's going to continue in this case.
Privacy advocates are concerned about boys using girls' restrooms and vice versa. And a scholar who researches marriage and religious liberty says a new scientific report challenges leading narratives about sexual orientation and gender identity. That study is published in this week's Journal of the New Atlantis. Dr. Ryan Anderson joining us from the Heritage Foundation. Ryan, why would you say that everything we hear from the media about sexual orientation, gender identity is really wrong?
Yeah, the report really highlights the two of the most commonly heard claims in the media, that people can be born that way and you can be a boy trapped in a girl's body and a girl trapped in a boy's body, that both of those claims are not supported by the scientific evidence. And yet we see in Justice Kennedy's majority opinion for the Supreme Court last year, he says, the science is now settled, people are born that way, it's an immutable biological orientation. They're saying that's not what the science shows.
So the science actually contradicts that Supreme Court ruling if you base it on that.
Well, it certainly doesn't support it. What they're saying is that we don't know what the origins are of sexual orientation. It's partly biological, it's partly environmental, it's partly experiential. And that people who want to rush to say it's all biologically determined, it's all that way at birth, they're not doing justice to the science.
What would you say is the biggest takeaway from this research?
I think the two of the big takeaways are the claims about the science not being born that way, not being trapped in the wrong body. The other two takeaways, though, are what the outcomes are. They highlight that very poor mental health outcomes for people who identify as LGBT. That's not explainable just because of bias or stigma or stress or kind of negative reactions to that. They say that accounts for part of the bad outcomes, but something else is the explanation here. We have to do more research to find out. And then the last one would be transgender procedures in general, but particularly for children. They say there's no science to support that a child should be encouraged to transition, to identify as transgender, and that even in adults, those who have received transition therapies don't report better mental health outcomes, even though the surgery goes well from a purely physical standpoint.
We're seeing so much policy based on this, and isn't policy based on science, or shouldn't it be?
It needs to be informed by science. The authors of the report, they're both trained as scientists, physicians, trained in psychiatry, so they don't discuss the policy, but we need to be informed as citizens about this. They point out that over 80% of children who experience kind of gender dysphoria will at some point grow out of it. So if they feel stress at their gender at some stage in adolescence, they naturally grow out. We should think, what will school policies do to help prolong that gender confusion if they help encourage people to identify as transgender?
This seems like really solid science. Do you think it will affect public opinion, or will it be dismissed in our culture today?
That all depends. We've seen other pieces of solid science, when they come to politically incorrect topics, be demonized and the authors of the report be attacked. One of the authors of this report was the chair of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Hospital for several decades. He taught at Johns Hopkins Medical School for several decades. It's hard to attack him. His co-author has taught at over a dozen different top-notch research institutions. He currently is a fellow at Johns Hopkins and a professor at Arizona State University. These guys have good academic credentials. They looked at 200 peer-reviewed studies to evaluate what the literature shows.
Solid science. Dr. Ryan Anderson with the Heritage Foundation, we always appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And today marks the anniversary of two technical achievements in recent history. 50 years ago, Lunar Orbiter 1 sends back the first image of the Earth from the viewpoint of the Moon. Now, the Moon's cratered surface takes up much of the photo. That white spot there in the background, that's the Earth. And the World Wide Web marks 25 years ago today. The technology that brings us all together dates back to August 23, 1991. Now, the Internet and the World Wide Web are not the same thing. The Internet actually was first connected in 1969. The World Wide Web refers to pages found on that network of servers and computers. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. May God bless you.